is Cheryl Erickson, and I'm the Indigenous focused ECE instructor with Louis Riel Vocational College. Today's video will be a summary of Chapter 7 in Nutrition, Health, and Safety, and we're going to look at food safety. Please ensure that you are reading Chapter 7 of your text, as this video is not a replacement for your chapter readings. So when we talk about foods and food illness, often food illness occurs because of a biological hazard. And what does biological hazard mean? Simple terms, it's something that makes us sick. And so that could be something we've ingested via a microorganism, germs that contaminate the food that we've eaten. Could be bacteria, a virus, a parasite, fungus. This is actually the most common and the greatest to our health, the one that makes us sick more often. And some of the ways that it can make us sick is through an infection, some type of infection that makes us sick or makes us sick to our stomachs. A chemical hazard is another a food type of illness, so something that we've ingested again that's making us sick. And when it comes to chemicals, often it has to do with the process of the preparation. So something during growing season, or when it's growing, the harvesting, processing, or storing that food. So it could be pesticides, herbicides, the cleansing detergents used in cleaning, as well as how it is stored. So with storage facilities, there should be some type of cleaning and disinfecting process before that food comes in. Physical hazards, so items that could harm us, make us sick, or injure us as far as foods we're consuming. So things like that are when you're finding glass, when you go out to a restaurant and you're eating and all of a sudden you put something in your mouth and you bite down and it's hard. It's not the right texture of what you're eating. Most common things found in your foods are glass, rocks, beads, glitter, staples, bandages, insects, hair, and fingernails. Food allergies and intolerance types of hazards for food ingestion. So things that we're feeding children that are unsafe for them, so they have an allergy to that food item. Sometimes it's the first time they've ingested that food, so you don't know, or they have had some type of cross-contamination, and that's how the food is prepared. For example, you should have 2 cutting boards, one when you're preparing food, one for meat, and one for your vegetables, your fruits type of thing. So you don't want your meat and your raw foods to touch each other, foods that you would just simply wash off and consume because of the toxins that could be in meat when it's not cooked. So going forward, sickness due to allergies is very common. We really need to read those labels. We want to make sure there's no cross-contamination and be aware of major allergens and less common type of allergies. Major ones would be something that is life-threatening, that is going to affect your airway or a child's airway. Those ones you really need to be aware of. So we do have food safety regulation guidelines in practice. They are established. You know, there's Canadian foods inspectors. There's processes that foods go through. It's monitored, it's regulated, so it's really important. And there's also American standards as well. So I'm going to point out more of the Canadian because that's what I'm more aware of than anything. And so why are food safety and regulations guidelines established? It's for our safety and our protection. Assists us in developing policies to keep us healthy and safe. conducts inspections and is used as a resource. So foods are always inspected, and sometimes you do purchase a food or use a food that is recalled, and you might get a recall notice, or it might be in the media that this food bought at this particular brand of food bought, and it will say where, it will tell you specifically the label and where you bought it from at times. Costco does this, and it's alerts to let you know that some people became ill when consuming that food. So if you have it, you can return it. Not everybody sometimes is affected as well. So it is really good practices to ensure the safety of individuals. And it also, food safety regulation will investigate foodborne outbreaks. If it's a large number of people at a community hall that all get sick and have the same type of symptoms, that is something that you would report to public health, and they would want to investigate that because they don't want it to occur again. They want to ensure that the practices are being followed within that environment where that food has been cooked and served as well. Continuing on with this, contamination risks during food purchasing. So approved meats and poultry should be regulated. You should be buying your daycare foods from a regulated source. Typically, it's from a grocery store, and when it's from a grocery store, it's regulated through Canadian guidelines, and so that is really important. You want to ensure if your food is being delivered that they have safety regulations regarding that. So if you're buying frozen, when it's transported and delivered to you, you should receive it frozen, because you want to buy it frozen so that you can keep it frozen until you need to use it. What's the process for canned foods? When you're buying canned foods, we don't buy cans that are dented or swollen. That's a really good sign that there's something wrong with them. And food should be prepared in a health department inspected kitchen. So in a daycare center, yearly, you will have a health inspection for your relicensing, and they will inspect your kitchen. They have a whole checklist of things that they're going to go through to ensure that your fridge temperature is at the appropriate temperature. There should be a thermometer, as well as your freezer, that your dishwasher is washing at the right temperature, and that they might test for sanitizing as well. So it's a really in-depth process to ensure that foods are maintained, are stored at the right temperatures, and dishes and things are cleaned at the right temperature. That avoids illness. How can you minimize risk when receiving and storing foods? So you should inspect your foods to make sure things aren't opened. You should be checking the temperature of your meats when they arrive. You don't want to receive meats that are under temperature because they could be contaminated with bacteria at that point. You should also ensure that when you're putting your foods away, that they automatically store. So I would receive my frozen and my cool first to ensure that they go into that freezer and fridge right away. And then my packaged as well. And you want to create a rotation. You want to put fresh to the back and move things that you have to the front, and check those dates. You don't want to serve things that are expired as well. Again, follow health practices for hand washing. You should have a hand washing station within your kitchen, separate from your food preparation station. So when you go to your food preparation area, you already should have your hands sanitized. And so you should, ensure that you're washing vigorously, soap and water. That reduces the spread of illness. And you should be wearing appropriate attire. So easy to clean clothes. If you're working with food, you should have a hairnet on, a hat on to ensure that your hair is not getting into the food. And if you have an illness of a staff that is preparing the food, they should not be coming to work that day. They should not be preparing food when they're ill because they could be potentially contaminating that food. If you have an illness going through your environment, many times this happens in the daycare where you've had 3 or 4 cases of a specific illness. That is something that we would report to public health nurse, because they're going to want to monitor that as well and find out what you're doing to reduce the spread, further spread of that. So they're a good resource for you to help reduce the spread of illnesses and be preventative in terms of things that could be potentially harmful. So you're going to want to prevent cross-contamination by following appropriate methods in terms of food preparation and serving food. So really ensuring that you're cleaning and sanitizing, that you're thawing in the fridge. Meat should be thawed in the fridge. How you're cooling and reheating. So if you have foods that you're serving, they should be in warming containers at the appropriate temperature as well. You want to keep those foods heated, those heated food surfaces or heated foods sufficiently heated at that correct temperature so that nobody gets ill. You're going to want to supervise that family style food preparation and eating, especially when allergies are concerned, because you don't want anybody to have an allergic reaction because of that cross-contamination. Monitor how long food is maintained at room temperature before it's served. There's a lot of foods that could pose illness if it's warmed. You know, things with mayonnaise and that egg-based could be a potential cause of illness as well. So ensure that children on special diets also are receiving their appropriate food, the food that is for them. So when we're looking at food safety and we're looking at specifically children within the daycare center, infants in particular, we want to really ensure that we're discarding all unused formula. We talked a little bit about this in chapter 4 when we were feeding infants. So, you know, really ensure that when breast milk comes to you that it is dated. Date, time, because you want to discard it appropriately. And if they haven't drank it and they're not wanting to take that, to discard it as well, because it's not going to be, it could make them sick going forward. Do not heat breast milk, formula, or baby food in the microwave. It is an uneven temperature and it could burn their mouth. Another thing we discussed the other day was not feeding honey to infants because it's not pasteurized. You want to ensure when you're presenting infants that foods that it's will not pose as a choking hazard, so cutting it up into smaller pieces, bite-sized pieces, appropriate for that particular child, depending on where they are developmentally with that eating, and that you're sitting down and supervising those children as they're eating. You also are looking at children with special needs and what their particular interests are. So if you have a child that could be overly sensitive and pellet and they're choking a lot, maybe their food needs to be thickened so that they're not choking, so their beverages could have the thickening agent added to it. And again, when it comes to children with disabilities, they're going to have their own healthcare plan that's going to guide you to what their specific needs are, and you can work within that accordingly. Foods from home, how do we ensure safety when it comes with foods from home? And again, you're going to really ensure that parents understand your rules regarding food, the peanut-free You're going to really encourage families that are providing lunch that lunches are cooled. So if you don't have a refrigerator for lunches to stay in until the children eat them, that there's ice packs in that lunch to ensure that food isn't getting spoiled. You're wanting to ensure that food items are labeled and dated so that it's not, eaten after it's expired or, a few days old. And food is not shared. And again, food is typically not shared because of allergies. You're going to want to have a plan as well, emergency plan, that food dense type of supply plan in the event that there is some type of an emergency. And this is really a best practices type of scenario. Centers should be practicing emergency responding or emergency plans, your shelter in place, where you go in the event of a tornado, things like that. So within your practice, where do you go? Where's your evacuation site? When you're going there, that particular place that you're evacuating to, if it's within your basement, should have bottled water in there, and it should have some canned goods in there, staples like peanut butter and jelly, to sustain children in the event that you have an actual emergency and they are hungry. And that's something that you should monitor. So it should be checked monthly when you go through your fire plans. When you're practicing your fire plans, take one step and make sure that the items in your emergency response area are not expired. So that does conclude Chapter 7 of Nutrition, Health, and Safety, looking at food safety. Please do see your instructor if you have any questions regarding this chapter, and also just to check in to ensure that you haven't missed any handouts or assignments pertaining to Chapter 7.